Thanks, Ray. So, yeah, thanks for having me, but really thank you to NJBIA, to Michelle for leadership on these issues, and to you for convening a program like this that does dive into the different technologies. And this has been fascinating. And hopefully everyone who's been watching, and those of you here, are really appreciating the entire spectrum of options that are out there. I've always been a proponent for an all-the-above strategy on energy policy. I think this today shows the opportunities that are there from a whole host of technologies, existing and emerging, and what the future of our energy industry can look like. I should also say it's reflective of a national policy too, which is really a good thing. You know, taking a step back and looking at this, the Infrastructure Act, of which was a total of about $1.2 trillion for all of the infrastructure projects that were in there, that has 62 billion that was appropriated just to the Department of Energy, supporting all of these emerging technologies. So that's just a reflection of what we're seeing nationally, but also here in New Jersey. And that's a good thing too, because it was a bipartisan effort, and it really does reflect the entire spectrum of an all-the-above strategy for our future energy in the United States. So I'm pleased to be here to give a brief overview of advanced nuclear. I'm also glad, I'm really glad, that Senator Zwicker was here to do the academic piece of this, because I'm not the technician and I would not be able to do any of that justice. But he did obviously explain the difference between fusion and fission. And what we are talking about, as Ray mentioned, is fission technology. But also, as Andrew mentioned, the technologies, fusion, as well as these fission technologies that are now in deployment for advanced nuclear deployment, are ones that were basically on the shelf. The DOE, after the Manhattan Project, shelved many of these, and there was no further activity. And that's largely because Hyman Rickover, who was driving then the technology deployment of nuclear, particularly for military uses, was to use a light water reactor technology, which was then deployed as small reactors in our naval fleet. And the rest of the technologies were really put on the shelf by the DOE. So they're not new technologies, they're actually renewed technologies that we're now talking about. So I'm pleased to be here, a former president of the BPU. I am an independent consultant with Archer Public Affairs, do regulatory work all throughout the country and a lot here in New Jersey and the region. But I also have since I left the BPU, the opportunity to be on a number of advisory panels and efforts. One, the Clear Path, which is a policy institute in Washington that has long been advocating for clean energy technologies. I also sit on the US DOE's Electric Advisory Committee, which advises the Department of Energy on smart grid deployment and a number of other efforts. And then I have had this opportunity to work with this group that I'm here today representing, called the Coalition for Advanced Reactor Energy Solutions. It's the combination of a number of the developers in advanced nuclear and NGOs. ClearPath is one of them, but Third Way is another. NIC, the Nuclear Institute, NIA, Nuclear Innovation Council, CTAF, the Climate Action Task Force, if some of you are familiar with that, and others. And that coalition is out, and we've been, for the better part of the last 3 years, educating state officials, state energy offices, state public utility commissions. We're working with the National Governors Association, with the associations that include the state legislators, to educate about the deployment of advanced nuclear, the potential, and its potential, as Senator Zwicker said, about fusion, which is closer in deployment than people would think. So let me first do this. The next, oh, I have it, okay, great. So first, just to sort of define and level set what we're talking about. People talk about advanced nuclear, they talk about SMRs. Just take a step back, because advanced nuclear is really broken down into two things. One is the style of the construction, separate from the size of them. So first we talk about the size of the reactors, micro-reactors, which are under 10 megawatts, small-scale reactors, which are between 10 and 300, and then large-scale reactors. So that's one set of gradations, because the technologies are broken down by the developer and the technology itself into some of these smaller versus larger nuclear reactors. The small modular reactor is actually a reference to the construction, and which we probably know now is that the existing nuclear fleet, like has been built, largely stick-built on site, the last one being Vogtle in Georgia, just like those which are here in New Jersey and Salem, are built on site. SMRs are modular, literally built in a factory, taken to the site, because they are smaller and can be built with greater precision and efficiency in that setting, and then taken to the site and assembled and then put to use. We'll also need to consider advanced nuclear reactors and the type of technologies, of which there are several. So light water reactors, which is the current prevailing use of nuclear, such as the large ones which are at Salem or elsewhere that have historically been built in the United States and across the world, are light water reactors. They take water to cool the process through the core. That creates steam, goes to a turbine, and that's how you generate the electricity. These advanced technologies are very much, or can be different. Many of them are still light water reactors, but then there are others, other technologies, high temperature gas, liquid metal, and molten salt. So when we think about advanced nuclear, we're talking about something other than just an SMR, because we're talking about the unit as well as the size and then the ability to deploy. This is an overview of several of the currently being developed technologies and developers. So just a small reading, and Ray, I think we're giving everybody these slides if I'm correct, and if not, you can distribute this to all the attendees. So this is a number of the current technologies being deployed. So the first one's NuScale, and many of you may have heard about NuScale. Has actually been approved and is now going to proceed to development in Utah. It is a consortium of Western states cooperatives. The NuScale unit, NuScale, the company, has been out probably for the last 10 years stumping to get approvals, which they have. Relatively small in size, as you see, 77 megawatts. But here are some of the others which are in current deployment activities. So GE Hitachi is moving ahead with one of its in Washington State, X-Energy as well. Terrestrial Energy, which is a molten salt technology, which is slightly different. And these are, by the way, moving through the NRC. TerraPower, some of you may have heard about TerraPower. TerraPower is the enterprise backed by Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. Is a different type of technology, and that is being slated to be built and deployed in Wyoming, and that is under development. There are a couple others which are interesting, which also are moving ahead. Oklo, which is on the slide here as well. And Oklo is interesting because it has a different business model. The others are considering how to be deployed either with large groups of either into a distribution system or some of these in co-ops out in Western states. Oklo is a smaller reactor that has a business model where it is being built on a merchant basis by and through the use of power purchase agreements to large corporations for the energy that it will develop. So this is just a handful of them. There's several others, but these are those that which have either received DOE grants are getting funding through the infrastructure bill and that are moving ahead. And those first 4 are likely to be developed and actually in use by 2030. So this is, as we've said, as Andrew said about fusion, very likely to be deployed quicker than you think. So there's a number of them out there. They're moving ahead. I should tell you that across the country, there is great receptivity to consideration of it. We probably haven't heard as much of it here in New Jersey just because we have a robust existing nuclear fleet. But I would think that in the future, we may hear more here in the region. Now, just to review some of the advantages of advanced nuclear. Yep. First, they are smaller, and that modularity that I mentioned, so they can be built more efficiently and taken to a site. So that's a big advantage. Lower accident risk is one of them. The fuel sources, the containment vessels, everything, as opposed to some of the existing fleet of nuclear reactors don't have all the same safety concerns. So much so, and this is actually a huge development on the regulatory front. The NRC, back in the summer, in July, did vote to direct staff at the NRC to draft a new set of rules for advanced nuclear. Now, the existing nuclear fleet, many of you may know, has a 10-mile safety perimeter. So in Salem, the safety perimeter goes over to the state of Delaware. And for obvious reasons, should there be a release from the large reactors, that perimeter is much bigger. Because these technologies are small, because the containment vessels are smaller, because in many of the cases, they do not even have the same risk of an exposure of a nuclear fallout. The NRC has recognized that they can make that perimeter much smaller, at least and no more than a mile. And they have also directed staff to consider the type of technologies and whether they can be to the fence line of a facility. That in and of itself, that regulatory change will help drive the use of advanced nuclear in certain settings, and I'll come back to this. And this is a discussion that's happening elsewhere. The transition of existing coal plants, repowering to advanced nuclear at that site. Andrew mentioned that, referenced it, reusing existing infrastructure where there's existing transmission hubs. So basically repowering existing sites, and that discussion is happening across the country. Clearly, the benefit of it being zero emissions is huge. And there is much commentary these days that with our aggressive goals across this country and elsewhere to get to the zero carbon goals that we want and have established, most commentators in the industry are saying we can't get there. We cannot get to that 100% because they can't get to the last 20%. We could probably get to 75 or 80% reductions in emissions across most places here in the United States. We can't get to 100%. The technology, current technology, just won't get there. So this is a solution definitely to get us to meet those goals that we're talking about. The other is that most of those technologies are load following. They can be ramped up and down very quickly, unlike the existing nuclear fleet, because of the size and the complexity of their operations. Many of these can be ramped up and down very quickly as if it were a peaker plant. So when you think about what I said earlier, the all the above strategy, the deployment of large-scale renewables, for example, and some of the other technologies we're talking about, as well as potentially the deployment of advanced nuclear, to have that capability, then looking at all these technologies together and how they work together really, really is powerful. Now, this is one other aspect that I bring to people's attention. Our coalition is one of the only groups I think that's out talking about this aspect, though this discussion does go on. This slide really does make a very particular point, and that's this. Advanced nuclear, as with other baseload large generation capacity, should be looked at for its cost for its entire life cycle. So an advanced nuclear unit could like the current fleet, could probably run for up to 80 years. Some would say even longer, maybe 100 years. The safety concerns are less, the technology and the infrastructure can last that long. When you stack it against over the total life cycle cost, comparable to other generation sources, and yes, looking at, say, wind and solar, which has a limited lifespan because the turbines have to be replaced with wind. The infrastructure, the generation infrastructure that comes with it may have to be replaced. Also, with bulk storage, we just don't know that technology yet, but nevertheless, that's got a limited life as well. So when you stack it up, advanced nuclear along with the others, the overall life cycle cost is probably comparable or more competitive. Oh, and by the way, as we know, with intermittent resources, you still need to have a set of backup 24/7 or load following baseload generation anyway. So looking at it for total life cycle cost, when these decisions are made, I encourage policymakers and regulators to be looking at this very issue when they make decisions on these investments in generation sources. So here's just a recap of some of the issues. The first is as I mentioned, this is bulk power generation. It's 24/7, it can be scaled, it could be incrementally deployed because of the size. Now, people do ask about cost. This is still in development, but the developers that are deploying are saying they can do this for between $32 and around $50 a megawatt hour. Now, PJM's capacity market right now is 35 or 34. So even though this is emerging technology and all the costs aren't necessarily baked in here, that's a pretty good range, which really puts it in a zone of being competitive with existing prices for generation. And it has the greater flexibility, unique resilience benefits, such as those that I mentioned, which is the repowering of existing sites. There are a number of studies and reviews of this that have just been published. The DOE 2 weeks ago identified roughly 100 sites across the country that could be repowered. They look specifically at fossil fuel generation sites that could be repowered with advanced nuclear generation capacity. That just got published 2 weeks ago. It's on their site. I could give everybody the citation if necessary, right? And there are a number of companies that are exploring it. Southern Company, Xcel Energy, Constellation. And then one of the other really kind of interesting aspects of this is because of the nature and the size and the flexibility, not just for power production, now industrial users are also out publicly talking about the use of advanced nuclear. So large industrial users could take and site these advanced nuclear units on a site, a manufacturing facility, a chemical facility. Dow, the chairman of Dow just a couple of months ago did say that they're actively exploring the use of advanced nuclear at some of their sites. That's for heat production. So there too, there is a whole level of benefit that could be provided by advanced nuclear, taking those kinds of heat production efforts, industrial heat production, power production, putting them off the grid, and then with a 24/7 zero emissions capacity that would offload other generation sources. So there are plenty of opportunities. And then one that could in and of itself be its own discussion. We talked about hydrogen earlier today, Garrett from NextEra. As he mentioned, the production of hydrogen is very power intensive. One of the other discussions that's going on is the co-location of advanced nuclear, smaller units at sites, co-located with the production of hydrogen. And what a win-win. The power production is zero carbon, producing a fuel that will be zero carbon. So lots of advantages coming sooner than most people think at a competitive price, and much discussion across the country about how advanced nuclear could play a part in our energy future. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.